Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today's first conversation in the Inclusively series, presented by Lewis Insight and Senza Fili. Our speakers today are Chris Lewis of Lewis Insight and Monica Paolini of Senza Fili. We would like to encourage our audience to participate in today's conversation. Please share your comments and questions using the Q&A button at the bottom of the Zoom screen. All comments are visible to all participants, so please keep the conversation polite and respectful. Our speakers will do their best to address questions as they become relevant to the topics being discussed, so please do not hold your questions until the end. And with that, I will hand it over to Monica.
Kendra, thanks so much for the introduction. And this is really a special conversation we are having, one that we have planned for now quite some time, Chris and I. We have been talking about starting to do some work on inclusivity and diversity for quite some time, and now we finally got around to have this initial conversation. So today, we're going to try to discuss what is that we have in mind, what are the reasons for us doing it, but also we would really like to hear what you think and hear your suggestions for how do you see this moving on, and how you possibly want to get involved and things like that. So with that, many of you probably know Chris already, but I think that I would like to ask Chris to introduce himself first, and then we will go with the conversation. Oh, one housekeeping item, please do send your questions and actually comments as well. They're just as valuable through the Q&A, and everybody can see them, so you can have a conversation among yourselves as well. And don't wait until the end, just get going. So Chris, over to you.
Thank you, Monica, and hello everybody. You're right, Monica, this conversation has been going on for some time, and I guess it started from my point of view around looking at accessibility and how, as a blind analyst, obviously I use a lot of technology to do my job as an analyst, how that was evolving, but it's developed into so much more. And certainly my day job is still looking at the telecom industry, but more and more I'm looking at this notion of accessibility, and it's led me to look at inclusive design, which is the topic of today. And one of the reasons that we want to do this and we want to get your feedback and your questions and comments is that it's sort of quite a unique approach for the industry. We've never had this before. Certainly if I go back to the accessibility discussion, it was very much around individual disabilities, and it was the way that the thing now I'm doing this. So my left ear has got a feed giving me messages from other people, so somebody just thanked me. Thank you, Matt, lovely to be with you. So what I was just saying is that the inclusive thing, it's a totally different approach, because in the past we approached it by individual group that was excluded, whether it was on accounts of disability or anything else, and we'll come on to define these a little more as we go through. But what it came evident to me was that it's a very fragmented and just not scalable approach to do that. So as we move into this new digital era where everything could be connected and everybody should be connected, then suddenly we need to think, actually, we need a very different perspective, and we need that holistic view as to how these things hang together. And it's interesting that when we try and put a name around it, we talk about CSR, the corporate social responsibility that we used to have. We talk about ESG. We talk about EDI. And for those of us in the communications world, EDI used to be an electronic document interchange, but it's now equality, diversity, and inclusion in the broader market. And we're trying to put this lens to look at it from the point of view of the telecom and related industry. And with that in mind, and Monica, a bit of your background relates to this. Do you want to say how perhaps some of your original research, your PhD work was around this subject?
No, well, it wasn't really around this subject specifically, my real PhD research, but I did some work on what used to be called human factors. And I remember at the time when the whole concept came about, it was like, well, of course, when you design things, you have the users in mind, right? It doesn't. Oftentimes, it really doesn't. And I think that there is a question of trying to understand who the users are. And when Chris and I started talking about this, we were thinking more in the lines of specific disabilities or specific things that you're trying to address. And then as we start talking, and this is why it took us some time, we understood that there is really a much, as Chris said, it's a bigger issue. And it's actually a bigger opportunity to think about all the dimensions in which we are different. So inclusion and diversity come to be the same thing. And so we're going to talk about inclusive design, but there's been a lot of work being done over the decades to actually bring in and to really think more carefully about who is that you are developing services, applications, or even the way you have the workplace designed. So there is a lot of work, and so as we were talking to each other, we understood that we wanted to have a sort of more encompassing framework that all the way goes deeper. So it's not just adding on something for, say, someone who is blind or deaf or whatever, but it's a different way to approach the way we design services and applications.
And
And
Monica,
yeah,
what's really interesting here is that the old approach is very much a bottom up. So we're looking at individual users, we're looking at individual parameters. So if I can't see very well, I need a certain access method, and we say that's fine. There's so many of those issues, but at the other end, this inclusive design, when companies are designing products and services, that if you try and do that for all those multiple groups on the bottom up approach, you're just never going to address it. But if you start with this inclusive design, and there's a couple of really good academics that we'll send links to later on, and one at the Royal College of Art here in London, and one at the University of Toronto. And this notion of inclusive design, you say, rather than designing for the middle, which is what we traditionally do. So we traditionally design for a very narrow, somebody described it to me the other day as being, we design for Silicon Valley. Silicon Valley designs for Silicon Valley. So you could that profile of person, affluent, got plenty of devices, obviously not particularly focused on disability. So, but if you develop that, then anytime you want to add things on for people who have a visual problem or a cognitive issue or a physical problem, it becomes a clunky add-on. I've been experiencing that for the 40 years I've been working in the industry. But if you identify and build those peripheral requirements in from scratch, then actually you get the center for free, because all of the peripheral requirements by default have a common denominator that address those common requirements in the middle. So we talk, and because we talk in telecoms, we can slightly tongue in cheek say, this is another edge. We're designing for the edge, and we get the center for free. So whenever people start talking about edge in discussions, we can throw this in and say there's another edge to think about, which is the edge, the peripheral user case. And I think that it's very important to bring that to the discussion and try and step back. And rather than in the past, we've definitely designed things along the lines of technology as we've introduced new technology. And actually, this is it's a much more inclusive design process, isn't it? It's not leaving people out in the cold.
absolutely. And as you say, we should not be designing based on technology. It's based on the recipients of the technology, the people using it. And that's exactly, and our argument, and we're going to go back later, but I just want to introduce it, is that we think that that's clearly an ethically good thing to do, but we think that there is more to that in the sense that this is it's an opportunity to increase profitability and increase the market. And this is really important because ethics is a great thing. It's like good to do good, but if you can also make it profitable, it makes it much more likely that it's going to happen. And so we really, so we want to go on to more like be concrete. What is that we can do? And again, it's thinking holistically, thinking about who are the people using it. And, as Chris said, a lot of things are designed for the Silicon Valley or the laptop class or whatever you're going to take. There is a concept that that's the majority of the people, but it really isn't. And it's probably not even average, because there is so much diversity out there. So to think about that people with disability are a minority is just not accurate, because everybody has, a different, is in a different type of position. So we really should think about the whole heterogeneous side. There is no majority out there.
But Monica, to put numbers in context, and I know people love numbers, so I did a few pieces of research, probably dating back 10 years, that Dr. Mike Short initiated when he was at Telefonica, and just even though there's no consistent source of data around disability, even without that, we came to 1 billion people with different forms of disability. And as you're quite right, that there are people who gradually, the elderly population often isn't in that category, so that's another massive chunk of people on top. And we know there's also the issue of, by the way, being temporarily disabled. So, you can't get access to your video, so you might use audio and that sort of thing. But then if we look at the statistics around the world in terms of people who can't get access to the internet today, and once again, there's no really accurate figures, but it's at least 3 billion of the world's population, if not more than that, who don't have access today. So there is a lower level, if you like, commercial issue. There's also a group in between who are people who they have probably the commercial means to do so. They're not perhaps trained to do so. They don't have the education to do so. And no one has ever shown them the benefits of it. And to your point about the economic benefit, all of these people have an economic role to play. And when I did the original research, and you could argue anyway about the economics and the numbers of this, but it's at least a $4 trillion market, because you've got 1 billion people, and the way they're spread across the world, obviously there's a certain differences in their spending power, but it's a massive market, and they want to be part of it. And the benefit to the industry, bringing in the next billion connected people into the mobile world is obviously a massive issue. But then getting everyone to then use whatever services they can in that. I mean, I dare say we'll come onto the metaverse later on, I'm sure, perhaps as a closing topic. But in that ultimate digital environment where everything's being done digitally, then we want everyone to benefit from that. And I think the other overlay, which is really important to mention at this point, is that the business model that we've traditionally used in the telecom industry is, we sell a device and a service to a person, we sell a device and product to businesses. Well, we're now much part of this much broader digital environment, and therefore allowing all those people who may well have been previously excluded, as well as the so-called mainstream market, allowing all of those people to get access to all the services and generate wealth and so on, is a massive incentive for everybody. So designing it so everybody can consume it in the way they want to consume it is really important. So yeah, you're right, that stepping back and that holistic view is just incredibly important for the industry.
Now, there is a comment that it's from the audience. A question is, how do we get past the social stigma associated with inclusive design, which might appear to be targeted towards the niche markets from the big telcos who are chasing cool young people? Need to show it can appeal to the mass market and how can make money. And I think that this is exactly what we're talking about. And I think that the reason why there is, you say stigma, is associated, is because a lot of time when you see these sort of accessibility features, first of all, they're hidden, and they are on top. They're put on top in a way that it's annoying for everybody. It's not working well. It's clunky. It adds complexity. So if it's built into the process of designing the service and applications, it will not be seen as a sort of as a heavy addition, as an imposition, if you want, it's not something that detracts the experience of everybody. It's just that more people can use it. Now, on the profitability side, I think that not only we need to think about the people using it and potentially paying for it, they might, but also for a lot of organizations. So for instance, healthcare, social services. So there is all sorts of other entities that stand to financially benefit from it and they are going to be willing to pay for it.
Definitely. And that's the business model issue that I was raising there, which is that people will pay through different sources. So it may well, your social services example is a great one, because it may well be paid for through either through insurance, if that exists within a country, or through a third party. But it's that new, we call it B2B2X, don't we? But there's also a spin on that called B4B, which is where businesses do things for other businesses, which is more of an ecosystem play. And I can see much more of that. People becoming more aware of it. It gets paid for in different ways. You know, the whole internet model, let's face it, and the big discussion in our industry about, you know, should the over-the-top guys pay for more of the connectivity? Well, actually, the end users are paying for that as well. You know, the business model has changed significantly already. It will continue to do so, whether it's paid for by advertising, by private insurance, or whatever. But it just changes the point of contact. But I think there's another really important point to raise here, Monica, which is that the design of systems, and this comes back to the question of what do we need to, what sits under inclusive design. And I made lists, and every time I went back to my list as we were preparing for this, I changed the list. You know, I kept adding things, and that's why we'd love people to give feedback if we're missing anything in here. But, you know, from the point of view of the way that systems are designed within companies, the way the interface is designed on devices, whether it's laptop or mobile, the way in which the software is designed, you know, the openness of APIs, the way we might be able to pass information between different services and so on. All of these things actually mean that if we build a more inclusive set of services from the bottom up within companies, you know, so within telco, since we're talking about the telecom industry, if we build it from the bottom up in there, actually those organizations become inclusive by definition. And that also becomes an employment opportunity for people with disabilities or whatever within those organizations. So that plays into the diversity angle within employment. Because we're going more software centric and more digitally driven, then all of the channels of communication that we use to reach out to all of the different user groups, and whether they are the ones who've previously been at the focus, at the center of the market, or those edge examples that we just touched upon, then all of those, the ability to jump between those different channels means that the customer can select which is the best channel for them. You know, so obviously I'm not a big fan of letters being written to me. I'm not a big fan of people pointing me at websites. But I am a big fan of actually speaking to a customer agent who is knowledgeable and can talk to me about the products and services. And by the way, so are a large proportion, certainly in the elderly end of the market. So I think when in the previous question about Gen Z and the youth, yes, we do see a lot of emphasis on that because they're the next generation of people buying the services. But actually, if telcos especially look at the map of who's paying most money to them today, you know, there's a hell of a big market out there who are perhaps not very satisfied and who would benefit from a more inclusively designed set of services and set of technology behind it.
Yeah, and older people tend to have a lot more money. So it's not, you know, I should say, we're not as cool, but, you know, there is a question of, you know, how, you know, to really think about things that are not necessarily as sexy as, you know, I'm sure that, you know, Chris, you've seen it, you know, we have to go as analysts through so many demos. And when you think about, you know, things like the metaverse or, you know, you just want to think about people going on holidays, people doing, you know, all sorts of entertainment type of services. But when you think, and when you go back and look, for instance, at COVID, the wireless industry has been really instrumental in being helpful to so many people. And I think that we can just move that further, because this is really something that, again, not only is good and useful, but it really addresses a need that is out there.
It does. And I think I say there are so many angles to this, and you know, please bear with us. We're jumping around a bit, but we will write this up and come to some sort of conclusion around this. But you know, one thing I'm very conscious of is that there's two elements that are really important here. One is content creation, and one is content consumption. And you know, there's a message I got prior to the event here from a guy who's a specialist in the standards that are used to get web pages so they're absolutely accessible, so they can deliver the content. They've got all the right triggers. Now, I know these standards exist, and I've even seen a multiverse industry group talking about standards for inclusion as well, which is great. But the execution of that, the way in which content gets created and tagged and therefore available to all of this diverse community is still so way off the mark. You know, so that's all the stuff that somebody with good sight and good technical skills can get access to. You know, we've not done a great job. The design of that needs to change significantly. And then content creation, in terms of, and I don't mean just doing TikTok videos, but in terms of collaboration, working with colleagues. You know, I like most people on this call have spent the last 2.5 years doing everything via Zoom calls and Teams and WebEx and so on. And I can tell you there is no consistency in the way that I, as a blind person, can get access to the mechanics of this Zoom or WebEx or whatever. There should be some sort of at least consistency, at least consistent short hotkeys to be able to do things. So the way in which we build all of this consistency and we think about all the people using the services is so important. In fact, I was just on a call with a very large telco just before this call, and one of the chief execs of the company couldn't unmute himself. Now, I sympathize with that. That's because I can't see the buttons, but I would have thought that he or she would have been able to unmute that evidence. So that education, the simplicity of interface, the design around real customer usage is something which I think we need to do a lot more work on.
Absolutely. And, you know, if you go back to like the Zoom and this type of applications, you know, we're so used to use them now that it just becomes second nature to us. But for people out there that are not the laptop class, that do not live on Zoom, actually, Zoom is not at all intuitive. So there is a question, clearly, if you cannot see the buttons, that's a problem in terms of, you know, you cannot do the same things. But so you need an alternative to that, but also you might just be not digitally savvy, or you don't have the same experience. So there is all sorts of issues that we really need to think about. And if you think about when you design the next Zoom-like application of somebody like you using it, you're limiting yourself to a very small group of people.
You're limiting it, and also there was a great example of a friend of mine. His mother's 101 years old. She's in a care home. She's got a little screen tablet thing with 4 buttons on it, and one button says call Julie and one says call Richard. And it's a video link. And just so simple. You know, it's taking it down to that level. That what she wants to do, it's that device specific. So we've gone the other way, haven't we? Where we're now using laptops and mobile devices which are multifunction. You know, I do wonder whether perhaps we'll go. Things might swing back in the future for design, where, you know, a screen is more designed for our interaction with people or consuming content or whatever. So multiple different screens in the future. But yeah, really.
And we might have both. I mean, you know, a combination, because we can. Now there is another question from the audience. It's talks from Santinger. A framework focusing on accessibility and inclusive design has been a predominantly successful approach adopted across many areas of organizations like product, brand management, brand marketing, customer operations, digital, etc. It does require continually talking about what it is and how everybody can play a part in removing barriers in everything they do day to day for consumers. And I think that this kind of brings us to another thing that we want to talk about, you know, what can we do about it? So yes, there has been clearly a lot of progress, but I would say not quite as much. And what we're trying to, Chris and I, the goal of what we're trying to do is really talk about it, because I don't think that anybody has found a solution. This is really a lot of work. And so the question is to really compare notes to an extent, to understand what is that different people, different companies are doing, what's working, what's not working, how can we do better? So there is really something that is intrinsically a conversation rather than us or anybody else saying this is the way to go. Is how can we go? What are the challenges? How can we move forward?
And I think, Monica, we've talked about inviting other people to join us in later episodes of Inclusively, and I think you're right. There isn't a right and a wrong answer. You know, we will gradually work our way through with many different stakeholders, and I think that's the beauty of this, is that it's not just about people doing web design. It's not just about people doing interfaces on smartphones, on smart speakers, on laptops, on TVs. It's about the way in which we design everything from, and what is promising, and I think we came across this when we were talking about this with various companies, that the big players, let's say the Googles, the Microsofts, and obviously Apple and the device guys have done a lot to improve inclusivity, to include accessibility from all sorts of levels. And of course, there's a financial element to that. Well, we've got to bring the cost of the devices down to let that digitally impoverished category get access to things as well. But it is very different. It is very different for different organizations. And I think especially remember, we're talking about the telecom industry here. So one of those things I always try and do is step back and stand in the shoes of the consumer, the user of the service. And once again, so I'll say, if I'm wanting to communicate with somebody, to make a phone call, to send a message, to get onto a website, to join a collaboration system, how easy is it for everybody to do that? Obviously, is it financially prohibitive for them to get on board? Then that's an issue we need to address. If it's the way the interface is designed, and I think certainly if you think about the way the web evolved, and I'm lucky enough now that I can't see websites anymore, but I can hear how cluttered they are. And compared to that, the mobile device is much less cluttered. So I prefer to go through my mobile device to get on when I'm joining things or looking for information. Now, is that because on the website people want more advertising to catch your eye when you're looking at a particular page or so on? So I think we do need to think of design from every possible angle. And when we bring people in to discuss it in subsequent episodes, to see how is it being addressed within a company which is much more broadly based in the, let's say, in the web world, in the IT world, and then to learn how within the telecom industry we can make the telecoms companies, whatever we call them in the future, we can make them more inclusive, so they think about the way their customers behave. Because telecoms in many ways, there's a bit of a parallel thing going on here, where telcos in the past expected companies to deal with the technology and work with the technology they provided, clunky old telephone, for X25 frame, all these old services. Whereas now we're part of a much broader ecosystem, and actually we need to make it much simpler to get involved, so people can connect, so people can do things they want to do, live their lives, do their shopping, as you say, go on virtual holidays, whatever. So there is no single answer rather, but it's really important that we make sure that every step of the way, from the device, through the interface, through the software, through the system, through the connectivity, to get out all the way out and to communicate with other people, that those are all open to be able to be used in whichever way people prefer to use them, or they may be restricted to use them in certain ways, as we've talked about previously.
Absolutely, and again, and this is what and this is where we would like to have your specifically your input, and what is the best way to to move forward. What point, what kind of conversations should we have? And we talked to a bunch of people as we were preparing for this, and some of you are in the audience and give us a lot of very helpful feedback and initially, but we'd like to get more to really understand. This is really something that it's new in many ways. So it's how can we do it? Because we have a lot of technology that is out there that we can use. The technology is not the barrier, is not the technology, it's how we use the technology to deliver and to improve the value of connectivity. We have some more questions from the audience. So there is one about the fact that connectivity is intrinsically not inclusive because of the physics of it. Unfortunately, that you can't really change. It is true, but we're also making a lot of progress. It's not just fiber; it's wireless. So I think that we're trying there.
Do you think satellite will change that, Monica?
It could, and I think it could and it should, because we get to a point. So you might not have the same speed everywhere, but that's okay as long as you have enough to get connectivity. What do you think?
Well, I agree. In fact, just thinking about that, the fact that we have all these rural development projects going on, and often government backed, is indicative of the fact that yes, the telcos have focused on where they make most return on their investment. So I do think that's true. There's another issue which I think is worth exploring, and I'm sure you and myself and many of the people listening there's a lot of discussion about the metaverse and how fantastically immersive it will be. But one thing is, I was reading something yesterday about the gaming industry, and how, you know, the expectation that everybody will join in at the same level, as in, will everybody have a big VR headset? You know, and Apple's latest one was what, $1,500. So the answer is no. But actually, the different sorts of communication, there might just be an audio only participation within a game. There might be a video only, there might be a watching only option. You know, there might be a fully immersive option. There might be. So I think we get a bit hung up in the telecom industry about having the fastest possible, the broadest possible bandwidth, the lowest possible latency, and all these issues. But actually, in terms of bringing people in, people might well be brought in through other means. So I think we've got to be very, very conscious of the fact that not everybody will have that you know, that massive screen and that joystick and all those other things, but actually that rendering the service across whatever is available to the individual, and it might be over a satellite rural link, let's say, or it might be I don't think it'll be over PSTN for much longer, but you never know. So yeah, I think we have to be careful that we're not just aiming for that glorious ultimate solution. You know, that we need to make sure it's practical, pragmatic, and actually delivers value to the individual, and obviously is part of that broader ecosystem.
Absolutely. And, you know, if you think, for instance, like audiobooks, and okay, so this is really like from a technology point of view, it's very low tech. I mean, it's just somebody reading a book, right? And yet it can be very valuable. So there are a lot of things, as you say, it's not, we shouldn't really be thinking, you know, the 5G, 6G type of use cases. There is way more interesting stuff, I would say. And especially if you look at, you know, the healthcare, you know, especially if you see elderly people, disabled people that cannot, you know, they might be forced to their home or whatever. There is so much that we can do. And again, the savings, not only the improvement to their life, but also the cost savings and the societal benefits are huge. And actually, so there is another question about the iPhone that mentioned as a usability disaster. I think that in an attempt to differentiate and add value, and I think that again, this is where what happens. I cannot really comment to that. I don't want to comment to it because I don't even have an iPhone. But oftentimes, what the sort of accessibility features get a bad rap is because they're so clunky. They are
honestly, Monica,
and you can, Chris, I'm sure you have a bunch of.
Well, I can't see the exact wording of the question, but honestly, I pretty much run my business on my iPhone today. You know, I think it's accessibility. Apple has been the benchmark. I think Samsung and Google have made massive leaps in developing that. The laptop screen reader stuff has got much better. It can be clunky, and it is, but you know, frankly, people adapt around it. And once again, it's about education and learning and training. So honestly, it's come so far. Obviously I'll happily take the question offline and talk to the individual about because I wouldn't agree. I think it's phenomenally accessible compared to all the days back. If you remember, I remember my Nokia C30, was it C30? Which had the first screen and had first Twitter and email on it back a long time ago. Brilliant device with a little T9 keyboard. The Apple iPhone today is so accessible, but that's for me. That's for me and I'm purely using the voiceover as a screen reader. But let's not go down that particular rabbit hole. So.
Yeah, and I think that, you know, generally speaking, as much as we think that we need to do more, there has been progress. I mean, we shouldn't be saying, oh, that's just terrible. I mean, it is
major progress, and I think the great thing is that as we move into this next era of more software defined, more software centric telecoms, if you want to call it, for want of a better phrase, you know, the ability to be able to move to provide the APIs to be able to move from area to area, to use common blocks of code in open source, obviously, actually it plays into the hands of being more inclusive as long as we think of it from scratch. And so when we're designing new things, I think that's the really important issue, is that, you know, if we try and do it later on afterwards, it'll be clunky, as you say. So I do think that's a very important thing we need to build it in now, and perhaps there's certain areas we start with, whether it's people with disability that we try and address initially. But my gut feel is that we need to raise awareness of this throughout all levels within the telecom industry. We want the C-levels aware of this. We want all the engineers aware of this. We want obviously designers. And as we move the emphasis to more applications developers within the telecom community, we need those people to be aware of it. And of course, they tend to be younger people coming through, but making them aware of it and building it from the get-go is really, really important.
Now, related to this, to some extent, there is another question, which is about European standardization. And John thinks that there is a lack of expertise in these areas, with engineers that are two-a-penny engineers that understand, there's not that many engineers that understand the requirements of inclusion. And how can we overcome that? And I think that this is really an issue, because, and I think that this is where we're coming in. It's like, okay, we understand that that's the goal, but how do we get there? And clearly engineers are not trained, and that's sort of part of the training, not in schools. Is it standards? I don't know. I mean, I think that it's standards are not going to really solve the problem here.
I mean, but there are, as I mentioned before, there are standards in W3C, WCAG, that where in terms of the way websites get labeled, but it's more, and I'm pleased to say within the telco community, certainly in some of the work I've been doing over the last 4 or 5 years, we see some really bright. So the fact that Telefonica initiated that research I talked about 10 years ago, BT has got people looking at this issue. It's got up to CIO level within BT. Orange have got a very good program where they're pushing it, to the disabled and the silver market, let's say. So I think there are pockets of it. I think getting it into the engineering or software engineering side, let's say product marketing side, making sure people understand this is a lucrative market to go after. And if we build these hooks in to begin with, then we can develop those services relatively straightforwardly. So is it a standards issue? Yeah, it partly is, of course it is. But I think the more open the API environment, the more software centric we build things. And there are, and to take it to the extreme, on the device front, Apple has an SDK which is around accessibility, and the applications in the App Store have had to go through a certain level of certification on accessibility. Doesn't mean they always deliver everything they should. There's always room for improvement. And the reason not only do we need to build in from the get-go, but it's got to be part of a continuous cycle of refresh of the applications. Because my pet hate is when an app actually gets rebuilt by a third party, and the new company doing it has not put the accessibility hooks in there. Happened to me on British Airways, for example, a couple of years ago, which drove me mad. Having had a very accessible British Airways app, suddenly it wasn't accessible because so it's a continuous. It's not just a thing at the beginning to tick box. It's all the way through. The testing needs to be done all the way through.
Okay, Stan says that he has spoken to stadiums and concert venues, and they're not very interested in accessibility and inclusion. And what are the incentives for them to do so? Is it policy? And I would say, well, policy might play a role, but just not, again, that's not going to cut it. I think that it is exactly the fact that these venues need to reassess their priorities and see that the inclusion is a money-making and profit generating opportunity.
And there's certainly a lobbying element in there as well in terms of getting people. And hi, Stan. It's a really interesting issue. And in fact, this is another convergence element, isn't it? Because a lot of the telcos that you and I, Monica, deal with, they're interested in Stadia, right? They want to put extra Wi-Fi. They want 5G to come down, and perhaps it's a push from some of those players which will actually bring the inclusion side down. We're seeing little pockets of it. What we have to do is make sure it's in people's minds all the time. So there is one of the reasons for doing this whole series is to raise awareness, and B, to learn from each other. And when we come on to talk to different players, whether it's a more hardware oriented vendor or a telco or academics, there are all these elements that we will gradually build in the course of this series to give people the ammunition to be able to go out and yes, well, frankly, in the sporting world, we should be lobbying people. We should be making them look at more inclusive. I mean, one of the things that I'm very conscious of is how, frankly, disabled sport has become so much bigger, certainly in the UK since 2012 and the success of the Paralympics. So get on board with that. Let's push it through those channels. But yeah, stay. It's a good question, and it's that issue that it's not mainstream. And what we're saying is, if you design, they're designing for what they call their mainstream customers, whether it's a football stadium or a rugby stadium or cricket or whatever. Actually, if we can add that element in of inclusive design from the beginning and saying, actually, they might need a certain device to give them access, or in my case, when I go to my Premier League soccer match on Friday night, I get my little earpiece to listen to the commentary. It's great. It really enhances the thing. And sometimes they do it for societal benefit. And I think that's where this used to be the CSR issue. So it was a good thing to do for society. What we're saying is it's also good for the mainstream commercial side as well, in terms of people will spend more to get a customized service. And of course, one of the things we discovered during the last couple of years working on this is that if we simplify and improve the design, that with inclusion in mind, actually, it's often the case that an individual who perhaps sits in that middle category, in that Silicon Valley category, actually they suddenly find they get better service. It's an easier interface. It's easier access to content, and that's what I genuinely believe that's the case. But we need to start with the inclusive view first, and then that will come along later.
So since we have a question on the metaverse, maybe we can get started on that. That had to be, can't possibly not do it. So the question is that I think that there is not only a challenge of providing accessibility for a fully diverse range of people to the metaverse, but there's also then the second challenge about how to provide individualized representation for that wide diverse range inside of the metaverse too, to make it fair and positive as an experience, but also possibly to make it safe for everybody. And I think, there's clearly more than that, but I think that, when you think about inclusiveness, you think about diversity and the fact that different people have different ways to access, different way to express themselves, and different way to do things. I mean, and so diversity in itself has a value. So for instance, where you see companies that have more women, they tend to be more profitable. So it's not, again, it's not just for the looks of it. It is actually an advantage. And now back to the metaverse. There was a paper that I just saw today was for Telefonica, talking exactly about the challenges of the metaverse. And I'm going to quote it because it said, there is an accessibility and inclusiveness risk if the metaverse is only deployed for the majority, leaving out specific groups such as older people who are less digitally savvy, or people with limited sight or hearing. And I think I understand the feelings of, it's interesting that they point it out, but to think about it, that's the majority is people that do not belong to that. There is such a thing as a majority. That's just, I think that's just misleading. It's just not the case. You have other people that,
Of course, Monica, what this also raises is the issue of identity, isn't it? It's like when you go into the metaverse, do you identify yourself? Do you go in as an observer, or are you a participant? I mean, I was recently slightly tongue-in-cheek asking the question, like, in the metaverse, can I see? Does my digital twin see, and can they feed information back to me? Can we use the modeling of the metaverse to actually better understand how people consume content? So there's a really interesting, learning process can go on here. But to go back to your question, people will access whatever this metaverse thing is, by the way, because we still don't agree on it. People will access it in whatever way they can. It goes back to my previous point about it might be audio only. It might be haptic feedback only. It might be fully immersive, but the way in which we go in, the way we consume content, the way we live within that digital world is down to us and what we want to do. So is it purely around entertainment? I don't think so. I think gaming will be a big initial part of that. But identity, I think security, of course, is a major issue in there. So we are so far away from delivering a lot of those dreams of the metaverse. But frankly, that's why we should now get this inclusive design thought process in place. So whoever's designing, those headsets. And by the way, there's also a flip side of this, which is that that virtual reality headset or XR headset that is being designed for the metaverse can also be used to channel information or services in a different way to people who might not see, might not hear, might not have other or cognitive issues. So we might well be in a position to simplify and streamline the way we communicate in that more digital environment. But let's not forget the physical world as well. So.
Absolutely, and there is some more on the metaverse from Mark Kelly. So he mentioned a new speech accessibility project for the University of Illinois, along with a group of technology firms, Amazon, Apple, Google, Meta, and Microsoft, that kicked off this month. This project is focusing on using AI to broaden and improve speech recognition technology that so many depend on. Current systems do not recognize many people with impaired speech, and this project intent is to make speech services available to a wide range of people with a diversity of speech patterns associated with disabilities. And I think that this is exactly what we need, because something like this could just be weaved into whatever application that requires speech, which is most of them, right? So this is just the kind of like the foundational part that would just make it easier. And again, in this case, for instance, it's clearly, if you have a disability, it's particularly helpful to you. But as a non-native speaker, I can tell you that it's helpful even if you don't have a disability, but you're just not
exactly
good at it.
And you've not even touched upon translation there, right? So within the way in which translation, so computational linguistics has come on leaps and bounds since I first studied it 40 odd years ago, and we do have simultaneous translation systems. So the language barrier that used to be there it's not perfect, but it's coming down. And I agree that sort of speech import is, and in fact, if I go back and think about it philosophically, the way we as humans used to communicate, we used to grunt at each other, and then eventually we developed language, and then we use gestures and then language, and then we put language down into words, and we use typewriters, then we turn that into computing, and now we're going back to using gesturing and all these other means of communication. So we're developing a full spectrum of the ability to interact on different levels, and that's what we're trying to create. So perhaps that's a different way of thinking about the metaverse. Is that's what we're trying to create. It's not just the snow crash, Neil Stephenson type view of the world or Second Life type view of the world. We're actually trying to emulate, people talking to people doing business with people consuming people, out there enjoying themselves. So I think there are so many. We're getting to a situation where the technology can obviously mimic life, because that's what digital twinning can do. But we need to do it safely. We need to be able to do it so the connectivity works properly, that the investment is there in all the different forms of communication to do so. But think about, and whenever I think about any issue like the metaverse, how you synchronize, how you make sure all these elements run together properly, let alone all the data flows around. And to go back to your question previously, Monica, about the healthcare and social care, the number of data sets flowing off somebody, of a person sitting in a care home, in their 90s, with a monitor on, a bracelet, whatever on, and feeding information back to the care staff in the home, to members of the family, to the doctor, to the nurse, perhaps even back to social services, it's just phenomenal. So the reason I say we need to design it very carefully initially is that we want to benefit from all this stuff. We don't want to get locked into particular ways of doing things in the future, and we want it to be accessible, whether it means accessing content, information, services, for everybody. You're quite right.
Absolutely. And when you think about it, I think that this is really the opportunity, because when you think about the value of that experience to the 90-year-old woman that is just sitting there on her own, it's so much more important, so much more valuable than us pretending to go on holiday somewhere else, wherever. Right. Just sort of like intuitive. Anyway, we have another question on the metaverse. Clearly, it's a popular item from Jeff. So maybe the metaverse, where we can enable those who are excluded today to be more included, maybe it should be better. This might be the best place to make a good business as well. Thoughts? I think that it's absolutely right. sure, there is all the sort of entertainment applications which are easier to sort of convey on a PR side of things. But when you think about really, again, the value that, the 90-year-old woman, that's really where this is really important. And that's where there is an opportunity, but we need to think about it so that we end up putting the sort of the right plumbing to the metaverse
yeah,
to develop that kind of services.
definitely. Yeah, and that's why in a sense what the challenge that we've set here, and the reason we want to go on and bring different people in for the next episodes and talk about how they're approaching it, is that there's obviously a cultural change within companies, there's a technology change, there's a business model change, all these things are changing, but we want to explore it so the people doing the software design for the operational systems in the telco can share what they're doing, the people designing devices can talk about what they're doing, wearables, there's a whole set of industries around wearables and glasses in the future that will be perhaps not the clunky headsets that we've talked about. But nobody, in a sense, we are trying to boil the ocean. There's no question about that. But by raising these issues and showing how they all interconnect and they can all help deliver better service to both to business and society. And I think it is that combination, isn't it? It's better for us as individuals, better for the businesses, better for society, because it will all come together. And I think we can drive perhaps government and local government, central government will pay for some of this stuff, but on the other hand, a lot of it will be paid for commercially, and the business models that emerge, need to make sure that we can bring people in from a cost of joining this service in the future point of view, a simplicity of interface so everybody can choose the interface, and simplicity of interaction. And if all those things run together, then actually the metaverse will be a fascinating place. I don't doubt that for a second. I'm not sure I'll be able to play football again in the metaverse to the same level as I did in the past, but you never know.
No, absolutely. But yeah, there is this you can have new business models, new ways of but I think that also we have to sort of realize that you just widen your addressable market.
Yes,
that is like kind of very old school principle that still holds. You just reach everybody.
Well, and if you think about it, what we've been discussing through the last hour or so, the assumptions, and we always have to be really careful what assumptions we make in these situations, but the assumption is that you've got a high-end device connected to a high-end service, you can use the software, you got a big screen to consume it or some wearables to consume it, and actually, of course, in many cases that's not the case. But people do want to participate. In fact, consuming media, obviously I don't look at video anymore, but I consume it as audio. Perhaps there is a market for that sort of audio that I consume with audio description, taking a film in that way. So it's not for everybody, but it's like an audio play. If you ever listen to BBC Radio 4 plays, that sort of thing is a great way of entertainment. I mean, it's just making people aware of all these things and bringing them in and getting businesses aware of it. And from a telecom point of view, making sure that we're building the connectivity, whether it's fixed, mobile, satellite, or whatever, to do that, and in our homes, out and about, or in business locations. That's what encourages me, is that we're gradually ramping up all of this connectivity, and we should be making it simpler for everyone to connect in.
Absolutely. And so there is another question from John, or actually a comment, and it's about it's more than standards. It says it's expertise and understanding, and maybe academic curricula also need to reflect these issues better. And I would say, yes, the education is clearly a part of it, but also we need to, reach out and see what's going on in academia as well in terms of research. And that's something that one of the sort of stakeholders, or the people that we want to talk about. So, and I guess that this is, we need to be open to see, what are people doing in academia, maybe in other verticals. Again, we don't want to reinvent the wheel here. So we need to and it has to be probably an education, but we cannot just wait for the next generation to be educated. We need to start acting before that.
Well, but I would say, Monica, even more importantly, we need to educate that new generation coming through about these issues now. Frankly, it should be part of, I know I would say this, wouldn't I? It should be part of the way people are educated at school. Certainly computer science and people doing that at university and wherever they learn that, it should be part of that. Accessibility and inclusion should be built in from scratch from there. And so therefore we do need all these stakeholders. To go back to one of the previous questions, the regulatory piece is also important because we don't want to miss anything. Perhaps some things do need mandating. But fundamentally, as an industry, whenever we think about a service or a product or a service that is being pushed to a different customer group, we think how inclusive is that? How inclusive is that service? How inclusive is that product? And if it's not, is there a temporary fix for it? And longer term, can we build it into the regular refresh flow of that product and service?
Yeah, absolutely. Somebody noted that we have good real-time subtitling, and actually I just added it today, and it used to be something that you had to pay for, very difficult, and it would not work well. And that's the kind of thing that you see, is that there is some incremental change. So we are doing better.
Massive. And I don't know if Larry's on the call, but Larry Goldberg over in the US has done some fantastic work in captioning. And what I will always say when looking at these issues, that we can try as analysts and frame it as broadly as possible. But I can only really stand in the shoes of someone with a vision impairment and think about it. I can think about other people, but to really understand the benefits of captioning for hearing impaired, the benefits of haptic feedback for other people, is just, we need to better understand the way in which people consume services going forward. And frankly, the metaverse is a fantastic way to set up simulation of how that might happen.
No, absolutely, and we need to get the engineers developing, the applications, the software, whatever, to really try to go beyond, because even if the person is deaf or blind, he doesn't understand other types of disabilities. So we need to get everybody involved to really be more aware of it. And I guess, as you say, the metaverse is a good way to sort of try to
proxy. It's a great proxy for everything we'd like to be able to do to make sure that anyone and everyone will be able to join their metaverse or different metaverses and actually consume and interact in a way suitable for them.
Okay, we only have a few minutes left, so we should talk about the next steps.
We should.
And we still haven't figured it out entirely, but we do have some plans. So maybe Chris, you want to say something about that?
Yeah, obviously this was a start point, and I hope you've gathered from the way we've talked about this, it's become we funneled a lot of thinking into this hour to get people. And what we would love to do is get your feedback. Obviously, we've got the feedback that we had from the interaction on Q&A today. We'll go through that, look at that. Please do send us any additional comments. We will go through and we'll produce a transcript of this, so we can share that with people, and then we will set up future episodes with different stakeholders, as we said, may well be from academia, from people, different companies with different perspectives on it. Perhaps some of the bigger players, the hyperscalers, and some of the things like Google and Microsoft and people like that have done some amazing things. But what we're trying to do is make sure that people learn from each other. Yes, it's still competitive commercially, but actually everybody can benefit from this. And if we can get this filtering down throughout organizations within the telecom industry, so products are designed initially without them, I think everybody will benefit. And I think personally, we all the way through research, and what I love about being an analyst, I'm sure Monica's the same, we're learning, or we learn every day. Something new changes our perspective on a particular topic. And I think that's exactly where we're going to do in the next episodes. So we're going to consolidate what we've picked up today, give that to people, get some more feedback, push it out on all sorts of media, and then we'll work on the next episode. And if you want to come and join us, join Monica and I think we'll do it on an individual company basis, Monica, because that will give us, chance to explore the way in which a particular company, a telco or a networking company or a device company, whatever, that or a particular academic, and we'll do it. So rather than having panels where people don't get enough time to delve into things, I think we'll do it on a company by company basis and gradually build up knowledge and hopefully get everyone on board with this inclusively thinking.
Yeah, as an analyst, I often think of myself as being an oyster that you just filter water, so water comes through to you, and so in this case particularly, we've been, as you talk to people, you really realize that different companies are doing things differently, and that's really important, and that's where I wanted to focus on getting different companies to share their experience and see what everybody
Yeah.
else can learn, and they would do different things differently, but there
And
is.
also, Monica, just to tie it back to the very initial, the opening comments, I talked about it going from CSR to ESG to EDI, and actually that's part of this broader sustainability view. So in a sense, the sustainability label is the one that hangs over this, because it's about creating a more sustainable industry, bringing more people into it, and a more inclusive, sustainable society, if you want to think of it like that. So actually, companies are doing so much more now around that area. CSR is no longer just over in the, in a small part of the company. It's part of mainstream. It's part of the board level thinking. Obviously there's an energy element to that. We're not talking about energy here. We're talking about some of these other areas of sustainability, about bringing in and dealing with more people. And I say better for the individuals, better for businesses, and better for society.
Absolutely, but I guess it's the whole set of considering technology as helping humankind rather than us serving technology to have a nice
Absolutely.
product. And I think that that's really something that is in common, whether you're trying to reduce the use of power or
Definitely.
everything.
Well, so please send us your feedback. And I think with that, do we hand back to Kendra?
Yes, because we're done. We need to go on with our lives. And I would like to thank you all for participating and for sending your comments. And we look forward to hearing back from you. Kendra, over to you.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Monica and Chris, for that wonderful conversation. And thank you to our audience for those great comments and questions. A video and transcript of this webinar will be available soon, so keep your eyes open for that. And we look forward to seeing you all at future events.